that was from a very young age, and that was where my passion certainly was with respect to sports, and probably drove my parents insane. Always running around with the ball in my hand and throwing it around the house and all of that sort of thing. So that was probably frustrating to them to no end, but for me that was where my passion was. And growing up, I wanted to be a footballer, and whether I was good enough to or not, who knows. But once I got my results back from my secondary school studies of just looking at, all right, what do my grades allow me to do? If my grades had been slightly better, perhaps I might have gone down a different path. If they'd have been slightly worse, perhaps I'd have gone down or I would have had to have gone down a different path if they'd have been worse. But it was a case of, all right, what's the best thing that I think I'm most suited to with the grades that I've got at this point in time? And then, in a strange way, being my sport of choice, if you like, and it became a little game for me that I created for myself in terms of how far can I take this, how much can I push myself to get myself into the biggest and best firms. I didn't have necessarily the best grades in the world in law school. Inevitably face setbacks, and I would say inevitably because whether it's injury or whatever else, there's always going to be setbacks in life, and it's just about your willingness to keep persevering when faced with those, and it's just about trying to find the enjoyment or the lesson in the difficult circumstances.
And thanks for tuning in today. This week's episode is brought to you in conjunction with Upskilled and their mini MBA. If you want to get the skills and knowledge to help move you forward without all of the big expense, then this mini MBA with Upskilled is the right way to go. Follow the link in the show notes and you can get $500 off.
Yeah. Jamieson, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. Bit dreary outside here in Melbourne, a typical sort of winter's morning here. So it's good to be sitting inside and chatting with you.
Good man. I've got to say that it is, for a winter's day here in Sydney, it is absolutely gorgeous. So
yeah,
we've still got to love. We've got to love being in Australia. So it's a great place to be.
It certainly is. I'm just saying, all playing true to form. Sydney, the nice, perfect morning, and Melbourne, miserable and rainy. So, true to form.
Yeah, that's about right. There we go. That's it. I might have to go to the beach today just to remind myself that I'm here. Yeah, and not in Leeds. Well, actually, before we do kick off, I have to ask, how's your AFL season finishing?
So the AFL season. So just for the guests or anyone who doesn't know, I coach a women's AFL team on the Gold Coast, and we had a tough season and bowed out ahead of the finals. And I also play at the same club, Labrador, in the Friday Night League, which is a great team that I'm a part of, and we train once a week and play on the Friday nights. And we got ourselves into a pretty strong position over the course of the season, finished third and gave ourselves a double chance going into finals. But all we managed to do with that double chance was blow it, essentially. So we bombed out in straight sets in the finals, which was disappointing, a disappointing way to end what was a pretty good season otherwise.
Yeah. Oh, that is a shame. I was hoping you were going to say, but we smashed it at the second chance.
At the second chance,
all the way.
Yeah.
So,
I think you knew we'd missed out in the first one in a close game, and then we were upset in our second bite of the cherry, and that was the end of it. So the grand final for that will be on Friday night this weekend. So would have been nice to have been playing in that, but next year, I guess.
There we go. Well, listen, that's it. You're building. You're building on that as I'm sure we're going to chat through today. It's about that incremental improvement of performance. So, shame. But well, look, on to bigger, brighter things. And our conversation, we've we've caught up a few times. I've really enjoyed our chats, really, about everything in and around sport and development and sort of individual progress. And I'm excited about our conversation today because I think listening to you and your story, certainly for those listening, we'll get a different perspective of how we can intentionally bring sport into our life, and so what that career transition looks like for you.
Yeah.
So let's kick off, but rather than talk about, I guess the sporting background as a jumpstart, what was your passion as you grew up as a kid? What is it where were you, and what did you want to be as you grew up?
Yeah, so for me, sport was always the passion, but it was never the path that I ultimately went down in a professional context. So grew up playing Aussie rules football and cricket. So it was footy in the winter and cricket in the summer for me. And that was from a very young age, and that was where my passion certainly was with respect to sports. And probably drove my parents insane, always running around with a ball in my hand and throwing it around the house and all of that sort of thing. So that was probably frustrating to them to no end. But for me, that was where my passion was. And, growing up, I wanted to be a footballer, and whether I was good enough to or not, who knows. But I ended up sustaining a traumatic brain injury in my under-18s season, playing at Labrador, where I'm still playing and coaching now. But I was playing at senior level as a 16, 17-year-old and sustained a pretty serious head injury. And that derailed sort of any ambition I might have had to progress any further. Whether I was good enough to or not, who knows. But that sent me down a different path completely with respect to what I was doing. Led me to law school and a 10+ year career as a private practice lawyer when I had to come to that realization that professional sport wasn't going to be for me at that stage of my life, given the head injury that I'd sustained.
And and that's such an amazing story for me. Opening there, that head trauma that happens, and there's a lot discussed at this stage on concussion, head impact across sports, all across the world at the moment. And for you going through that, and we've got people who I've certainly spoken to as athletes who have had to make tough decisions because of head trauma or serious injury. As you think back to that moment in your life, what was it for you? What were the decisions that you had to make, and how tough was it to go through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough decision to make for someone who had grown up playing sport, and that was something that was a major part of their life. And then you have an injury of that nature, and it was pretty significant at the time. It impacted my final year of high school in a pretty major way. Just with respect to being able to concentrate and study and prepare for exams and so forth. So it made you really take a look at, what am I doing? Is it sensible for me to continue playing, contact sport? And for me, I pushed on pretty aggressively in terms of trying to come back and play. And there probably wasn't back then, because we're talking, 20 years ago now when this happened, when I was sort of at the end of high school, if you like. And there probably wasn't the education or the information around the how serious the concussion in sport issue was at that point in time. And so I was pushing on and looking to return to playing and finishing off my under-18 season at the time as it was. And ultimately I returned to play after 3 or 4 months of pleading with specialists and brain doctors and whatever else to give me clearance to return to play. But you had to reflect as to whether that was a viable thing to be doing long term. And ultimately, at the end of that year, you had to make a decision as to what you were going to do. finishing high school and moving forward with your life, and that's when I committed to academic studies at that point in my life. But there were a range of complications and behavioural things off the back of that injury that I would say that I carry with me to this day, to be honest.
Right, and that must be really hard to, like you say, you carry it with you to this day. How does it affect you today?
It's just things like, and it's something that I guess it's just part of who I am. So you sort of just get used to and adjust to that just being part of who you are and how you operate. But just little things like, little memory lapses, forgetting where you've put something, or inability to focus or concentrate, on something for prolonged periods of time relative to what you were able to do prior to the injury. And it's just small little bits and pieces like that, moments of fatigue when you perhaps wouldn't have been fatigued, that just have to be addressed from time to time. But it's just those little bits and pieces, just forgetfulness and concentration and fatigue that pop up and are part of what I have to deal with, and have had to deal with across the journey.
Yeah, and it's amazing adaptability. In fact, I'll just say resilience as well, to have that dream crushed early on, and getting that. The impact that it had on that sporting career, at least on the dreams of sporting career, but then your ability to turn that into, well, another stellar career and move down that academic side. So whilst there's been this, I guess, this trailing impact that's had, it at least to me, it doesn't appear to have interrupted your ability to shift into, a private practice lawyer. I mean, do you think it? Do you think the injury and the fact your sporting career was shortened, to what extent do you think that helped you focus on becoming, an excellent private practice lawyer?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I was always, I guess, encouraged by my parents to make sure I was, focusing on studies, and I think everyone knew that I was passionate about sport as a young boy and as a teenager, but there was always that, you never know if you're going to make it, so make sure you've got something else to fall back on, and don't neglect your studies. And I never did as a teenager, and that was a good thing for me, a blessing if you like, because it meant that when I was put into a situation where I had to do something different, I was actually able to do that. And I know a lot of athletes, if they were to suffer a similar sort of injury, they might not be in such a fortunate position that they'd be able to divert down a different path like I was able to do. So for me, it was really a case of, all right, I'm not going to pursue sport as a career endeavor. I'm going to have to do something else. I've got good enough grades as a student to pursue a law degree, so let's do that. There was some level of apprehension about that, given the difficulties I was having with respect to completing exams and so forth in that final year of high school. But it was a case of, your grades are okay in terms of applying to do a law degree. Let's just head in that direction and see where it goes, and that sort of led where it led, and got me to a point where I was able to have a pretty impressive private practice career, working for some pretty major firms around the country and internationally.
I mean, that's a great outcome. I'm curious,
and it was just a sort of one step at a time sort of thing from my point of view. At that point, it was like, all right, I'll start the law degree. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do in 5 years, 10 years time. I'll just start it. If I can get through the first semester, then I'll do the second semester, sort of thing.
Well, and that in itself is amazing, because I was going to ask, how did you know what you were going to do? How did you even figure out, I'll just do the law degree to start with? what was that process like?
It was not a case of I'm so passionate about law, so it's an obvious thing for me to go into. I'm not one of these save the world crusader types of people, or certainly wasn't at that point in time. But it was something that I was interested in and capable with respect to the content. And it was a case really of, once I got my results back from my secondary school studies, of just looking at, all right, what do my grades allow me to do? If my grades had have been slightly better, perhaps I might have gone down a different path. If they'd have been slightly worse, perhaps I'd have gone down or I would have had to have gone down a different path if they'd have been worse. But it was a case of, all right, what's the best thing that I think I'm most suited to with the grades that I've got at this point in time? And then, there were 2 or 3 options there, and then make your decision. And it's for me, it's about make your decision and then make your decision work. There's no right or wrong. Certainly in that scenario, when you haven't got your heart set on something specific, it's a case of make a decision here and then make the decision work. And that's what I think I did.
Yeah.
Hi, I want to take this moment to thank Upskilled and their mini MBA for sponsoring this week's session. One of the great things about their mini MBA is it allows you to gain the skills and knowledge to help propel you that little bit further forward. It gets you understanding the vocabulary in the room, and also gives you some of those skills to navigate the corporate career, the government career, or indeed stepping into not-for-profit. So big thanks for Upskilled and the mini MBA for sponsoring this week. And hey, check it out. Link in the show notes. You can get $500 off.
Yes, yeah. And when you say about make your decision and make the decision work, tell me about that a bit more.
Yeah, well, it's a case of you are going to make a decision, and there's always a, what if I chose marketing? What if I chose psychology? What if I chose some different career path altogether? What if I made a decision to go and do a trade? These are all things that what ifs, but you're never going to know what the outcome of the what if is. So for me, it was a case of, you've made your decision, finish what you started, and that's something that I'm sort of big on. Personally, if you start something, finish it. So I sort of made the decision to start it, and unless it was a case of I just physically couldn't do it because of my injury, and I was sort of forced to withdraw from it, I was going to persevere with it until such point in time where I'd obtained the law degree, and then it would be, career paths and opportunities would emerge in due course, which inevitably they did.
Yeah, I get it. I understand, and so it's almost no regrets. So make your decision and live by that decision.
100%.
For you, the way you described it is, well, it's not binding for life, but do the semester, do the next semester, do the year. Great, I've got the degree. Now what would come next? Rather than saying, well, boom, here, this is me committing to something for for 30 years of my life.
And that could become overwhelming if you look at that as a teenager, because you don't have enough life experience at that point in time to know what you really want to do. So you're committing to something, and to sit there and say, this is what I'm going to do for the next 15 years of my life, could become quite overwhelming for someone. So for me, it was a case of, I'm just going to make a decision, and then I'm just going to turn up to the first day, and then I'm just going to complete the next logical step. And then allow things to unfold, but no regrets. You're 100% right. Maybe if I had have made a different decision, it would have been better. Maybe it would have been worse, but it's no regrets. Back what you've decided to do. It's not perfect, nothing, or it rarely is perfect. But don't regret. I think would be the key message there. Back your decision, back your judgment, and then just push forward with purpose and intent, and things will unfold for you in due course.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Now, you did talk there about, private practice, and we opened up with a conversation about you playing and you coaching as well. During your, professional career as a lawyer, how did sport remain in your life?
At that period of time, I probably I probably went through a phase where I was a bit, upset that I wasn't able to pursue what I wanted to pursue, and I was in another path, but I was committed to what I was doing. So it was like, um, I probably went off the rails a little bit in terms of a behavioural sense, and sort of just railed against my situation in that regard. And from a sporting context, I stopped playing and participating in sport because I thought that it was perhaps not a smart thing to do if I was to obtain another head knock or another serious one, but also because I thought, what's the point? Like, I've missed the boat now, so I'm just going to focus on what I'm doing. But there was something inside me that was sort of, a bit upset by that. But my connection to sport during that period of time was probably primarily as a fan for the next 5 or 6 years. I stepped away, and I was still very, very much a fan of the sports that I had been participating in, but had stepped away from playing once I went down the legal path, and the legal career ended up in a strange way being my sport of choice, if you like. And it became a little game for me that I created for myself in terms of, how far can I take this? How much can I push myself to get myself into the biggest and best firms? I didn't have necessarily the best grades in the world in law school. They weren't terrible, but by no stretch was I the ducks of the class. But I turned it into a game for myself to see, how far I could push it, and how far I could get with that, and that led me into some pretty exciting opportunities, and gave me, an ability to work with some pretty impressive legal minds in some major law firms, just because of that sort of sporting mindset that I applied to it, which is perhaps a unique way for someone coming through a law school to approach legal practice, but that was certainly something that I did, and with a reasonable level of success, I would say. For me, it wouldn't work for everyone, but for me, I just turned it into a bit of a game, and that sort of helped me to progress as far as I did, probably.
And that's an interesting approach, making it into a game. So I like the way you described that as your legal career became your sport. And in order for you to find that success, or a way for you to find that success, has been making it a game. And that performance, that competitive edge, that's what continued to drive you. You found where you wanted to go that way.
Yeah. And so for me, it was like, instead of trying to push to be drafted by the best AFL clubs, or to make it as a cricketer, or whatever it may have been, I positioned myself and worked to be involved with the biggest and most reputable law firms that were available to me, and that was sort of how I defined my success in the law game, if you like.
Yeah, I like that. And a good lesson there to take is how to find the game, how to I guess unleash that competitive spirit in what essentially would then be a day-to-day, a normal job, if I can put it in that way.
That's right. And turning up into a law firm and just reading documents and whatever else, pretty mundane compared to running around with your mates and kicking the football around and getting tackled and all the fun stuff. So you had to try and turn it into something that was a bit more fun, and I was able to do that, which was good.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I love that. That's interesting. And I think the way, coming to sort of where we are today, your career has taken another turn, or at least you are starting to make that shift. And so I'm curious about, what was there a moment or series of events that have inspired you to start bringing your passion for sport and your competitive edge in legal together?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it comes down to I think I touched on it earlier that there was something inside me, that I wanted to unleash, and there was a part of me that I'd been able to turn this legal career into a bit of a game for myself, but it still wasn't. I still wasn't involved in the sporting industry, other than as a fan, and that's where I wanted to be. And it was a case of I've got some incredible experience and connections and various other bits and pieces in terms of skills and so forth that have come as a result of that legal career. How can I use those to forge my own path in the sporting industry? And by that point, when you're sort of early 30s, you're pretty comfortable that you're not going to make it as a professional footballer or whatever the case may be. But you also come to a realization that there's other ways that you can be involved in the industry and add value to the industry. And for me, it was a case of how can I use my existing skills, experiences, networks, etc., to forge my own path in the sporting industry. And the most obvious step at the point in time that I was having those sort of internal discussions was to go and get accreditation as a AFL player agent, with the thinking being that one of the primary functions of an agent or a player manager is contract negotiation, and that being a transactional lawyer was precisely what my skill set was. So it was sort of like, let's do this, and then that that gets you a foot in the door, a seat at the table, if you like. And it's again, it's similar, I guess, to what I said earlier about starting the law degree, turning up for the first semester, that sort of thing. It was a case of, all right, let's go and get the accreditation as a player agent, and there was a course that you had to go and do that, and an on-site down here in Melbourne a few years ago. And it was a case of, let's do all the things that you need to do to get that accreditation, and we'll see what happens from there. That's led to me, returning to playing, to all of a sudden coaching, and various other opportunities opening up off the back of that I wouldn't have even anticipated at the time. But it's just funny how you take those first initial steps and things start to open up. Not necessarily how you would have planned or what you were intending, but things open up and opportunities start to present themselves when you have that courage to take that first step and that first foray, if you like, into a different industry. And I guess it's the same almost in reverse with respect to athletes who have spent that first part of their career, like yourself, playing, at a professional level, as a soccer player, and all of the athletes in various sports having that first part of their career as a professional sports person. What's the transition like after that? It's almost like I've done it in reverse.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it is in some respects, but I would actually say it's a bit like a sandwich. So you started off with that passion and that desire to become a pro Aussie rules footballer, you've taken this sort of bulk of your career, getting you to that 30s as a legal practice lawyer, honing a specific skill or honing a set of specific skills and capabilities. And now you are bringing them back together again, bringing sport and these new skills together. And that to me has a wonderful parallel for athletes listening. And actually, I'll say for anyone listening who thinks, how can I take what I'm good at and what I'm doing today and merge that with what I'm passionate about?
And hopefully there's a recipe there for someone to follow who's listening, because I think that if you can merge your skills and experiences together with something that you're passionate about, you can create something pretty meaningful. And that's different for everyone. Like someone who's been involved in professional sport as an athlete will have some pretty specific skills, but then when their playing days come to an end, how can they use those skills and merge them with something that they're passionate about, some sort of initiatives, some sort of business, investing, different career paths, whatever it might be. But merging the skills, because there's some pretty impressive skills that someone who is a high performance elite athlete picks up over time, and it's just, I think, empowering them to realize that they have some pretty cool skills that they can use to bring other passions that they have to life.
Yes, absolutely right. And finding them is or getting that confidence to unleash them as part of their second wind is something that has, I think is quite challenging. But it is a stepped process that that individuals can go through. How did you find then that confidence and clarity for you to say, okay, it's time for me to merge these two together, and this is the first step that I'm going to take?
I think it's just a case of backing yourself and being prepared to adjust on the run. I'm still very much learning and making things up as I go. But it's about just having that courage to take the first steps and adjust and learn from your mistakes as you go, and that's very much been how it's been for me. It's just been having that willingness to take the first steps and being open and receptive to feedback and to ways that you can improve and do things differently. And just being humble enough to take on advice and suggestions and things like that from people that have gone ahead of you. But just, I guess the point that I would make would be just having the courage to take the first steps without necessarily knowing exactly what the full path might look like. I think one saying that I use a little bit is, every marathon run starts with the first steps, and that's very much the case for me with my sort of foray into the sporting landscape. And I've run a couple of marathons over the years, and it's very true. When you start out on the journey as a distance runner, you might not think that it's possible to run 42 Ks, but start by running 1K, and then you can soon enough run 5, and then all of a sudden 10's not such a big deal, and then in time you're able to run that marathon. But if you don't take those first steps, you'll never run it. So that's the sort of
true. Yeah, I love that. So I'm thinking then, now you've started off on a new marathon, a new race, and when you think about that this the business for you. In fact, well, tell me about your business. Tell me about what it is that you're doing today.
Yep. So once I obtained that accreditation as a AFL player agent, or around the same time, I founded a sports agency, and I thought I'll set this up and let it just grow and evolve into whatever it turns into. And I started it up primarily to be a player management agency. G2G Sports is the name of the agency, and it's grown over time to become a business that offers player management, coaching, and consulting services, and still very much growing that business out. But it's something that is designed to just support athletes to obtain the best out of themselves and to get the best possible life set up so that they can concentrate on their sports, but be prepared for their transition when their retirement ultimately comes. Mindful that was my experience going the other way, and just having something where I can speak from my experience with respect to supporting athletes and talking to them about the importance of having something to transition to. And you'd be well aware, like, no matter how good you are, whether it's as an athlete, whether it's as someone playing football, cricket, soccer, whatever the case may be, you can be the best in the world at your sport, but your playing days will come to an end. There's an inbuilt redundancy there in professional sport, and it's just about creating something that puts support around athletes so that they can transition, so that they do have the ability to have that second wind and be able to surge with confidence into whatever it might be for them once their playing days come to an end. So that's what was the real driver behind setting up the sports agency, G2G Sports.
Mesh your that interest, your love of sport, and your proven abilities as a lawyer, and pulling that together to support that next generation coming through of athlete, I think is absolutely wonderful. And it brings you back into the sport, the sport where you distanced yourself from for a period of time, and you've now embraced it again, and hopefully things certainly do continue to thrive. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, no, it is, and appreciate the comments there, because that's what it has been for me, an opportunity to reconnect with the sport that I had distanced myself from, and that was something that I wanted to create something that I could add value to the industry and the sport that I cared and had so much love for, and hopefully I've been able to support it in some meaningful way, and will continue to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've spoken a bit about the impact that you want to have, or you're having, with athletes, and supporting them off field so they can concentrate on what they're doing on field. When I'm curious just a little bit about the steps you had to take. So there's a gap between getting the qualification as you did, and running a business and getting clients or meeting things. Can you just shed a bit of light on what that process was like for you?
Look, to be honest, it's an ongoing process, and it's just about having conversations with people, discussions like this that are really meaningful for me, to have the opportunity to share the story and hopefully add some value, or give some ideas to some of your listeners. And it's that the exciting part has been the running of a business, I guess. and that almost becoming like a sport in a sense. You go from a career where you're a professional and working in a high profession, a high pressure, high performance environment in major law firms. Expectations not dissimilar, I wouldn't have thought, to those required of elite high performance athletes. But it's about then going into business on your own, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of different hats that you have to wear when you're not any longer just the worker, if you like, and you've got to establish a brand, and you've got to do all of the other bits and pieces that are needed to run a business. And I'm still very much working that out and making mistakes and learning from them as I go. But I feel as though I'm getting better, and I see myself almost like someone who drafted as a player early on, and first year you're in the big league, and you're the new kid on the block, and you're not that crash hot, and then you learn a bit and you improve and you get better in the second year, and then soon enough you have your breakout year, and that's the way that I sort of look at it. It's just about just getting better and better. There's certainly people that are more experienced and the high performers, if you like, in the space that I'm operating now. But that's something for me to aspire towards and something for me to work towards. And it's just about again treating it as a game, having fun with it, and just learning about the sport of business, if you like, as you venture into this landscape. So it's with excitement and with great challenge as well. But for me, I wouldn't have it any other way. If you're in a sporting landscape, you like the challenge and the competition, and that's something that's been pretty enjoyable for me.
That's great. I just love listening to you talk there, and it's funny you've just changed one of the phrases that I talk about. I talk about the business of sport, and you just said there the sport of business, and
yeah.
I think it just it signifies that sort of approach that you've taken to it. And one that now I'm thinking, what, I like that. I'm gonna use that. I think we've got the name of this podcast episode, but it is really about turning it into a sport, because sport's something we love to do. It's something that inspires us and energizes us. And looking at the sport business is great.
Yeah. No, let's use that. That's cool. I reckon we can run with that and see where we can take
it. Yeah, I think so. Now, look, Jamieson, I've enjoyed this conversation, and I know we've got sort of many more to come. As our pursuits come together more and more.
Yeah.
When you think of the athletes that you work with, but when you think of athletes who are going to go through that trauma, that injury that has to make them change path, right? What sort of guidance or considerations would you give to them?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's just having that never give up attitude. It's inevitable that you're going to face setbacks and hurdles and have obstacles to overcome. There's been situations with respect to, put the injury aside, but just the foray into business where you feel as though where you've been knocked out and KO'd, and that's the entrepreneurial journey, I guess. There's points in time where you're sitting there going, why am I doing this? Like, I could just go and sit in a law firm and have a pretty comfortable existence, but just remember why you started, and that will be different for everyone, but when you face those setbacks, remember why you started, remember what's important to you. That might be family. There might be other personal motivators that are driving athletes, or other people listening to this. But just remembering why you started, having that resilience to keep persevering when you inevitably face setbacks. And I would say inevitably, because whether it's injury or whatever else, there's always going to be setbacks in life, and it's just about your willingness to keep persevering when faced with those. And it's just about trying to find the enjoyment or the lesson in the difficult circumstances. So I always think, rejection is redirection for me, and you might not see that at the time, but on reflection, you can look back and see things as a redirection. And I've had opportunities and people that I've met as a result of my injury that I would never have met if that had not have happened. And so there's always a silver lining in any circumstance, no matter how difficult it might seem at the time. So it's just about being prepared to look for that because it will be there if you're open to finding it.
Jamieson, thank you for joining me on the podcast today and sharing your story.
It's been a pleasure, Ryan. Thanks for having me, and look forward to chatting with you more and more as our journeys progress.